We have a global recommendation there. I'm happy to move that. Is there a seconder, please?
Second.
Councillor Linda. Right. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much to the representatives of the seniors, Rainbow and Youth Advisory panels. Great to see you. Thank you for your service. Okay, councillors, item 15. WW1 Centenary Memorial Auckland Domain Project Update and Funding Proposal. And we have recommendations there.
I'm going to support you here.
Very good. We have got excellent representation. We've got a few who have moved from this point to that. This is good. Right, I got Councillor Sandra. Sandra, welcome as a chair. Mike, I want to acknowledge you as representative, and also Councillor Christine and. Right. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members. And I guess it's appropriate we deal with this item at this historic meeting.
Yeah.
Jane's report covers all the facts, but just to give you a little bit of context, the working party, made up of myself, Councillor Fletcher, Sandra Coney, the chair of the Waitaki Local Board, Colin Davis of Orake Local Board, and Greg Moyle, Waitemata Local Board, was set up by the governing body 2 years ago in September 2014. A year ago, in September 2015, after a lot of hard work, we released the design brief to a meeting of stakeholders in the Town Hall debating chamber. So it's fitting in September 2016 we move on to the next step in this project. The working party was given a brief to scope the feasibility of a Great War Centenary Memorial, and also to come up with funding proposals. The scoping was challenging. However, the dedication for the memorial was not just for the fallen, because the great museum, the War Memorial Museum and Cenotaph, is dedicated to the fallen of the Great War. But it was we wanted it to be a tribute to all those affected by the Great War, all those Aucklanders, and wars in general. And I guess the generation most affected was a generation that began the task that we hope to complete make a step forward to complete today, and that was the building of the War Memorial Museum in 1929. And it was designed by the Auckland architects Grierson, Amer and Draffin, and they came up with this wonderful neoclassical design. The building was made of imported Portland stone. And why was that? The original cenotaph in in London, in Whitehall, and all the headstones on the Western Front, the Imperial War Graves or the Commonwealth War Graves as they are now, are made of Portland stone. And so our cenotaph is modelled on the cenotaph in London and Whitehall, and that is also of Portland stone. So our task was to come up with something which reflected and harmonised with the War Memorial Museum, and there was a debate between something artistic and something functional, and the design brief really came up with a compromise to incorporate functionality and scope for artistic creativity. Essentially, the model was based very loosely and inspired by the original concept by James Tyler, and that was to connect the Domain Drive to the Court of Honour and the museum itself. And so in February this year, some concepts were released, some of them surprised members of the public, but in the end we settled on Te Takuahi, the hearth, and with the instruction from the governing body to include the concept of connectivity, which was in the original design brief. So at this point in time, we have, after the governing body agreed on an envelope of $3 million, we have $1 million granted by the council in the long-term plan and $655,000 granted by the government lottery fund, which leaves a balance of 1.345 million, and we are now looking at ways to bridge that gap. And from the very beginning, a public subscription was always contemplated. The cost of Te Takuahi is 2.575 million, and that leaves 425,000 within the envelope to come up with the simple, unobtrusive pathway connecting the contemplative feature and Domain Drive up to the Court of Honour. So on that note, Mr Mayor, I'll hand over to Jane, and she may want to take us further into the report, and we're all quite happy to answer questions.
Councillor Mike, you happy to move this?
Happy to move, Mr
Or other
Chair.
guys? Excellent, good. Right, Jane, hang on, just before we'll just get Jane.
Seconding.
Oh, you're second? Right, good. Jane?
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Just introducing myself, Jane Aiken, Manager of Auckland Domain and Co-Governance, and looking after the leadership of this project from a staff or officer point of view. Really just to support Councillor Lee's comments, to acknowledge the leadership of the World War I Centenary Memorial Working Party, who are well represented today, but we're also missing members Colin Davis and Greg Moyle. I'd also like to acknowledge, just not 100% sure whether they're both here, but we have Sally Manareva, the Director of Public Experience from the Auckland Museum, with us today, and I believe we're expecting Roy Clare, the Director of Auckland Museum, to also join us in support of this item. Really the only thing to add, because I think the report can be taken as read, is that the resolutions that you passed back in February, in fact, already supported the general design and gave us very clear direction, as highlighted by Councillor Lee, in respect to needing to augment that design. So really what we're asking for today is endorsement for a capital fundraising campaign. So specifically the two resolutions that have already been put, supported are the to endorse a fundraising campaign for Te Takuahi, the hearth, on the provision that there is an additional suitable connection, and specifically to delegate the authority to the Chief Executive to explore and enable all funding mechanisms to enable that to happen. Happy to take questions.
Good. Okay. Right, to our two other members there, Sandra and Councillor Chris.
I'm just here in support of the proposal. We've made a lot of progress with the proposal from the early days, and particularly getting the support from the lotteries fund. Unfortunately, it leaving a shortfall from what we applied for. So I'm here in support of the proposal.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. In speaking to this, I want to throw my support in behind the chair of this, Mike Lee, and the chair, Sandra Coney, and the members of the committee. Colin has made a very strong contribution to this. Unfortunately, he lost his brother and he's away today. But it's been a respectful process, taking into account the importance of this in terms of Auckland and our history, and I think that Mike has well articulated, or Councillor Lee I should say, has well articulated the careful process to identify something that is complementary to our War Memorial Museum, but in a current context. So I acknowledge the presence here of representation from the Auckland War Memorial Museum, and just finally add that it was always anticipated we would look to the public of Auckland for fundraising, and I have no doubt that the CEO will do a superb job in leading us through the next stage of this process.
Very good. And
I just wanted to add one thing, and that's I took myself down to Wellington and looked at their, they have unveiled their memorial to World War One.
Yeah.
Wellington has a memorial to World War One, and Auckland is wanting to follow suit, and just pointing out the very large loss of life. We're actually in the period of the Battle of the Somme at the moment, in which many thousands of New Zealand men lost their life. So it's a very, you can't get into it without realising that the effects on Aucklanders that occurred at the time, that the fathers, sons and brothers that were lost all came back in a condition which often ended up with them not being able to take a full earning capacity going forward. Many of them had psychological injuries, and so the purpose of the memorial was to recognise not just the impact on the people that went overseas, but also the impact on the people who went behind, which is similar to that of the Wellington Memorial. So just to put it in context, you know, if it's good enough for Wellington, it's good enough for Auckland.
Sandra, there are many hats that you wear in our city, have done, and I suspect will continue to do. Mostly in a leadership capacity, but always supportive and very passionate and learned. I just want to acknowledge you for your leadership of the World War One Commemoration Committee. It's a significant working body, of which this is a working party, and I acknowledge Mike for his leadership and stewardship of this working party. But for you, this is a job that we left you with after you departed this chamber, and you've done outstandingly well. So thank you for your work and that of the wider team. Done really good. Councillors, questions, comments or queries? Councillor John Watson, welcome, and Councillor Wayne, it's good to see you.
Always good to be here.
Yes, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was just simply going to make the point that the notion of going out to the public for some sort of public subscription, I think that's a good one and entirely appropriate, especially given the huge upsurge in interest in Anzac Day commemorations for the last decade, but that just seems to get bigger and bigger. So I think that will be a subscription that will be warmly received by the public of Auckland, and one which I think people will give to rather generously and will feel involved as a consequence. So I applaud those efforts, and I'm sure that's going to be a huge success.
Very good. Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Jane, I wonder if you could talk us through paragraph 26 a bit more further work you're looking at doing, and explain fully, please, the gap in the budget. We've got 920,066. Is this other work as identified in paragraph 26 adding to that? So do we have an indicative total figure?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, the work to complete the design or to create the connection is going to occur during October. So until that work actually is completed, we will not know the amount of money that will cost. However, as is indicated by Councillor Lee, we have got a very firm goal in mind in terms of not exceeding the $3 million that was originally set by Council, which leaves a generous area of movement there in order to be able to create a suitable design. What we have highlighted throughout the report is that what we do know is the current cost of the design as it stands, and therefore the current shortfall of the design if it was implemented as is, which is 920,000 shortfall.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor.
I think we should be clear about the shortfall or the balance. The concept must include connectivity. It must be accessible, and so I think it would be. I don't think we should lowball the gap. There is a gap of 1.345 to meet that $3 million budget, and also to meet the full concept as went out with the design brief. I think it's important that if we're going out to the public, the original concept of a contemplative feature, and with accessibility is included, and that has the full support of the museum. But what we're doing here really is to making a major step in completing the Auckland War Memorial Complex, which has the museum itself, the Court of Honour and Cenotaph, and now 100 years later, this contemplative feature. But I don't think the work will end here. I'm sure future councils will want to enhance the feature and the pathway, but that will be up to them and the people of Auckland at that time. But at least we are laying the foundations and completing the framework and completing the concept of the museum War Memorial Complex.
Right, thank you. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.